Hi, I'm Pastor Mike from Park Avenue Baptist Church. It's great to have you with us today for today's sermon. We want to be a church that helps people. So if we can pray for you, or if you just need someone to talk to, we'd encourage you to fill out the connection card in the comments section below, and we'll get back with you. Thanks again for being with us, and we hope today's sermon is a blessing to you. we have some good news to share that some of you have been eagerly anticipating. We are reopening our physical site very soon for services. It will be great to be together, but it will definitely be very different initially, and things will continue to change for quite a while. We will be honoring the current recommendations for safety and doing our best to keep all attendees as safe as possible. We're going to learn and adapt along the way, and I hope that we can show exceptional kindness and understanding to those who may have a different viewpoint than our own. Sunday morning worship will resume on July 12th at 11 a.m. We will not have Sunday school, nursery, or any form of children's ministry for the foreseeable future. We're also doing an experiment this summer with the addition of a 6:30 Thursday night service. We are offering a second service to help accommodate summer travel and to help us comply well with social distancing standards. These two services will be identical in content, so we'd like you to only attend one. Please don't attend both. We want to keep everyone healthy, including you. And of course, we will continue to offer church online for those who don't feel comfortable attending in person yet. More details to come, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Good morning, Park Avenue Baptist Church, and happy Father's Day. It's a privilege for us to be able to celebrate the dads among us, and thank you for the difference you make in the lives of your family. We also want to be praying for those for whom today is an especially difficult day for any number of reasons, and let you know we are praying for you. We're also excited because 3 weeks from today, we will be back on site having church at church, and we're looking forward to that a great deal. Hope you can join us. Today we're going to continue with part 3 of our series in Ecclesiastes. We're calling this series Starting at the End, and I want to do a little bit of review, and then we'll move into some new material. We've been talking about Solomon. What has life taught you in all the things that you have experienced, the abundance, the power, the pleasure? None of it satisfied. And he came to the conclusion as an old man that everything is meaningless. Last week, we talked about the many places that Solomon searched for meaning and came up empty. And then finally, he came to the realization that knowing and loving God would create a framework for life that would give him the meaning that he craved. So, we could summarize and say life by itself is meaningless, and true satisfaction can only be found in God. Today, we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and I want to start with this idea that life is like a pile of Lego pieces. Now, Legos have been a very popular item in our household for a number of years. And the way my boys go after Legos is pretty different from the way I went after Legos as a kid. When I was a kid, yes, there were Legos, and they weren't made of stone. It was much more of a creative outlet for me. I wasn't trying to reproduce any pictures. I was just letting my imagination run wild. And this idea of Legos brings us to a quote from author David Gibson that really helps frame these abstract ideas for us in a very concrete way. He wrote, "If you have ever built anything by Lego or from IKEA, you will know that success is achieved when you work piece by piece, using each one in all the right places and in all the right ways and at all the right times. If you're trying to build a model to match the picture on the box, then going freestyle is usually a recipe for disaster. The difference between real life and Lego construction, however, is that we are not the ones with the instruction blueprint laid out in front of us. God is." That's a powerful reminder for us as we move into our passage for today. Ecclesiastes 3 starts out, and the first 8 verses are very familiar poetry. You've probably heard this at weddings, not even at weddings of believers. It's very popular in our culture. Songs have been written about it, and it starts out like this. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. Now, I'd like to read the rest of those 8 verses for us. I'm not going to have these up on the screen, but just want you to listen along. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to cry and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to turn away, a time to search and a time to quit searching, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be quiet and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, in terms of big ideas that we can take away from there, I mean, it sounds nice, it sounds really poetic and beautiful. If we're going to come up with big ideas, I would say this: life has a rhythm. Here it's called seasons. And we understand that, especially here in the Northeast, where there is sometimes confusing seasons, but theoretically at least there's a definitive summer, fall, winter, spring. And some seasons in life are common to all of us. We all go through them growing up. And some only enter certain lives. But nothing that you've experienced is entirely unique to you. There are other people who have lived, who have experienced what you are experiencing. Now, they may not have experienced everything you're experiencing. Your combination may be unique. But each one of those pieces, each one of those seasons, you are not alone in that. Also, the details and the lengths of seasons differ from person to person. God assembles our lives differently, and when we play comparison games, that's when we get ourselves in a whole lot of trouble and become very discontent. We may wish that some seasons lasted longer, and we may wish that some seasons went by faster. But we can't always choose. We don't get to decide how much joy, how much grief. Some of that is decided for us. And that's an important thing for us to understand. I want to use a quick visual for us. This is your life. This bracket here is going to represent your life, and from your birth to your death. And I just want to point out something really, really encouraging to you. Well, actually, we will get to something encouraging, but we're going to start here. How much control did you have over your birth? When it happened, where it happened? Not much. You were kind of along for the ride. And your death, guess what? You probably won't have a lot of control over that either. You don't know when it's going to happen. You don't know where. You don't know the circumstances. And the fact that you have so little control over your birth and over your death is a powerful reminder for us that you have far less control in your life than you think you do. There's a whole lot that's out of our control. The last couple of months have taught us this. None of us wrapped up 2019 with pandemic on our calendar for goals to accomplish for the coming year. But God did. So what we're going to be looking at is the idea that the poetry at the beginning of Ecclesiastes 3 sets up a problem. And then Solomon's prose through the rest of the chapter attempts to resolve that problem for us. Big idea? When we embrace our frailty, we can find hope in the reality that we are not in control, but God is. And that's good news. When we feel like we're out of control, like, wait, I don't have influence over much of my life at all. That's okay, because you have a God who has the control that you lack. We launch into the prose section, which immediately follows that poetry, and Solomon shifts from this beautiful poetry to this. What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all. Yet God has made everything beautiful in its own time. Now wait a minute. Verse 9 and 10 sound pretty discouraging. And then in verse 11 he starts talking about everything is beautiful. What's that about? And I think Solomon was onto something in his perspective that was starting to dawn on him. And I would express it this way, that our God is a master recycler. He wastes absolutely nothing. He finds delight in taking what has been discarded and considered worthless and transforming it into treasure. We may experience seasons that we would consider anything but beautiful, but we cannot see the finished masterpiece. It will be beautiful, but perhaps not today. And that's a hard thing. If you're in the middle of a difficult season, you may not find comfort in, well, this will all work out someday. I want relief now. And that's a difficult thing for us to grapple with. When we look at those areas that he talked about in the poetry, he talks about some things that we would automatically categorize as bad and some things that we would automatically categorize as good. But I want to look at these, and even the things that seem clear to us are really kind of complicated and kind of nuanced. In the bad list, we would put things like dying, planting, killing, tearing down, crying, turning away, tearing apart, hating, and making war. In the good column, we would put things like being born, harvesting, healing, building up, laughing, embracing, mending together, loving, and pursuing peace. But it's not quite that neat and tidy, because anyone else besides me ever have a good cry? Yeah, there's sometimes that tears are actually a very healing thing. Well, then I would say their crying is good. And a number of these that we could go through, and you may want to talk about how these things, they're nuanced, they're not clear. And then we have some that are just obviously, we don't even know what category to put these things in. Things like scattering stones and gathering stones, searching and quitting searching, keeping, throwing away, being quiet and speaking. It depends on the situation. We would be like, it might be really good to say certain things, and then it might be really good at other times to just be quiet and stop talking. So it's complicated for us. Continuing in Ecclesiastes, we talked about this idea in verse 11. Yet God has made everything beautiful for his own time. And then that verse continues and says, he has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. Now, I want to key in on that idea of eternity in the human heart, but I don't want to speed past the end of that verse. People cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. You and I don't understand what God is doing. And sometimes we judge his character based on the little bit that we can see. And we're wrong. So this is an area where we need to be careful. As we talk about him planting eternity in the human heart, I want to use a fun illustration, because there's some really heavy things here in Ecclesiastes. I want us to have a little bit of fun and consider 5 things that a dog has never thought. Now, some of you are nitpickers and you're going to come up with exceptions where a dog would think some of these things. Don't ruin this for us. Let's just go with the flow and consider these things. A dog has never thought, it's useless to beg for food, I give up. It doesn't happen. They keep trying. A dog has never said, well, social distancing is fine, because a dog wants to be near you. A dog has probably never said, no more fetch, I'm giving that up. They might be tired for that session, but it will be exciting again for them very soon. And number 4, I don't know if there's a dog on the planet who has ever said, I shouldn't eat that. They just don't have that kind of discretion and self-control. And we can have some fun with that, but I want to throw in a 5th thing that a dog has never thought. He has never thought, I wonder where I'll be in 5 years. And that is because animals have some different capacities than what we have as humans. Animals don't think about their future. They don't think about some of these big concepts that we're going to talk about here. Because he has planted eternity in the human heart, we have been equipped and we will be held responsible to ponder big things. Things like purpose and meaning and death and freedom and justice and eternity and morality and identity and time and happiness. And the list goes on and on and on. And that dog is not considering any of these things. He's thinking about who will feed me and who will pet me. And that's about as far as it goes. And I'm not knocking the dog, it's a great life. But it's not the same. You see, because God has planted eternity in the human heart, God is calling out to each one of us and saying, this is not all there is. Because when we think this is all there is, we get really discouraged and life seems meaningless. But he says, there is more. In verse 12, Solomon continues. He says, so I concluded that there is nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor. For these are gifts from God. You see, Solomon, something dawned on him that all these things that he had enjoyed that didn't give him meaning could have meaning in the context of a relationship with God, of recognizing that these are gifts from God. So I would suggest to us that you could think of it this way, that if it's good, it's from God. Now I know some of you are immediately like, oh, I know some enjoyable things and I don't think they're from God. They're bad things. Now hold on. That doesn't just mean that good is by our definition. And we need to trust what God says more than how we think or feel. Because our logic and our emotions are not reliable barometers much of the time. We also need to remember that Satan can't create anything. He can only corrupt what God has made. And God made it to be good, and Satan has twisted it up and corrupted it. And unfortunately, as humans, we tend to fall for it every single time. Verse 14, he continues, and I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God's purpose is that people should fear him. What is happening now has happened before, and what will happen in the future has happened before, because God makes the same things happen over and over again. That may sound cruel, but if you've ever been around a small child and they like repetition, They like that security of, can we watch the movie again? Will you read me the book again? And God knows that we can end up a little bit like that. Verse 16. I also noticed that under the sun there is evil in the courtrooms. Yes, even the courts of law are corrupt. Wow. It is a good thing that humanity has progressed so far from back when Solomon was alive and we don't have these problems anymore, isn't it? Yeah. Can you imagine? Evil in the courtrooms. What a thing to imagine. We don't have to imagine it. We live in it. And it's not just the courtrooms. It's in the government, in the police, in the administration. It's in our churches, our schools, our families, our healthcare, our corporations, our relief organizations, and our universities. And we could go, oh, there's just so much corruption everywhere, but there's one more spot we need to be on the lookout for corruption. And that's in the mirror. Because as long as we rail against the evil that is out there, we are in danger of overlooking the evil that is in here, within each one of us. And that's why we need a Savior. Because good enough will never be good enough. Because we are corrupt, we are sinful. A story is told from the early 1900s. A newspaper set out an inquiry to a number of prominent authors, asking them what is wrong with the world. One of their replies came from author G.K. Chesterton. And he said this: "Dear sirs, I am sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton." He was on to something that most of us try to deny. That the problem is out there when in fact the problem is also in here. I also noticed that under the sun there's evil in the courtrooms. Yes, even the courts of law are corrupt. I said to myself, in due season, God will judge everyone, both good and bad, for all their deeds. And I want to use another David Gibson quote here because I thought this was so powerful and so well stated. He said this: "One of the ways we learn to live by preparing to die is by realizing that death means judgment, and that this is a good thing. It gives my present actions meaning and weight, and it gives my experienced losses and injustices a voice in God's presence." See, we think of judgment as a mean thing. Oh, God's going to be so angry. But God is going to set things right. And that can be an incredible comfort to us as we live in a broken world. Now, I'm going to need a little help from you, and maybe if you're watching with other people, you guys can interact around this. What are these? Okay, go ahead, talk about it. You probably don't need you're probably right on this. It's a plastic spork and a tennis racket. And I just want to consider for a moment, and I do have a purpose in this, how are they alike? What do they have in common? So you may want to take a moment to discuss that with those that you're watching with. I'm going to give you 3 that I came up with. There are many, many more. I would say this: they have similar shapes. They are both tools people use, and you might find both of them at the YMCA. Now, how are these two things, the spork and the tennis racket, how are they different? Well, again, you could come up with a number of them. You may want to discuss that with those with whom you're watching. But my 3, you don't eat stew with a tennis racket. Wilson doesn't make a $250 spork. And they were made for different purposes. And that's where I want to key off as we look at these next 4 verses. verses 18 to 21. He said, I also thought about the human condition, how God proves to people that they are like animals. For people and animals share the same fate, both breathe and both must die. So people have no real advantage over the animals. How meaningless. Both go to the same place. They came from dust and they will return to dust. For who can prove that the human spirit goes up and the spirit of animals goes down into the earth? Now, I want us to be clear on what these verses are not saying. They are not saying that there is no spiritual difference between humans and animals. It's saying there's no difference in the life cycle and how that works. So using those same two questions, how are they similar, how are they alike, I would frame it this way. How are they similar? Well, animals and humans, they both were created by God. Neither one can escape death, and both return to dust. So those are ways in which we are similar. We can't deny it. But there are also very important ways in which we are different. Humans are divine image bearers. Animals are not. Humans have an eternal soul. Animals do not. And animals should be treated with kindness, but humans should be treated with dignity. And I say that because as divine image bearers and beings with an eternal soul, we need to impart these people with dignity. Those who are different from us, those we disagree with. And as Christ followers, we should lead the way and set the most powerful example in how we interact with people who are different from us. Verse 22. So I saw that there is nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. That is our lot in life. And no one can bring us back to see what happens after we die. So there is happiness to be found here. But the happiness that is here cannot be what gives us meaning, or we will find ourselves wanting. But when we have meaning from God, we can enjoy life because we don't have to be in control of everything, and we can acknowledge that God is. So, we started out, life is like a pile of Lego pieces. We also started out with the idea that we have inspiring poetry, and then we have what certainly seems like deflating prose. I can't control my seasons or much else. I can trust the God who is in control, even if I don't understand or approve. And that's hard for us to swallow sometimes. It reminds me of probably one of my favorite quotes that I've come across in recent years. I end up using it a lot. J. Vernon McGee said this: "This is God's universe and he's doing things his way. You may think you have a better idea, but you don't have a universe." That's a powerful reminder for us. As we wrap up, I want to hit on 4 points of application, 4 things for you to take away and for you to consider throughout the week. First of all, look for the good in the season you find yourself in. That can be really hard. That can be a big challenge. But we need to be careful. Don't be too impatient for the next season or too regretful over the one you've left behind. If you let it, it will spoil your appreciation for where you are today. This moment, this day, is a gift from God. Don't squander it by going, "Oh, I remember back when," or "I can't wait until I get to." Enjoy today. Secondly, no earthly season is forever. God can be trusted. So, if you are in a difficult season, you can be confident that it will not last forever. Wherever there's a sunset, there's a sunrise coming. Let God do the work in you that he desires now. And don't waste this season. Third, no earthly season is forever. God can still be trusted. So if you are in a pleasant season, you can be confident that it will not last forever. So don't get too attached to those things. Enjoy them while they are here, but know these things are not going to stay. They're not forever. Choose to seek God now more than the good things he has provided. And again, don't waste this season. Lastly, look around and notice the seasons others are experiencing. That's important. And we need to resist a temptation that we have to feel like we need to one-up what they're experiencing. And if they're suffering, if they're sad, if they're dealing with something hard, we can be very tempted to go, oh, I've dealt with something far harder than that. Don't do it. Or somebody is celebrating and you feel the need to say, oh, something much better happened to me. Stop it. If they are struggling, help encourage them. And if they are celebrating, join in and celebrate. In Romans 12, Paul wrote this, be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. So I just want to ask you a final question. If your life is like a pile of Lego pieces, what will you choose to build? Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the gift of fathers. Thank you for all the different seasons that you entrust to us. And God, we don't understand. We don't approve. We wouldn't do it this way if we got to choose. But God, would you help us to trust you? You are worthy of our trust. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.